So now that we have our publish date as well as a draft mode or draft boolean, we need to figure out our post list to change it just ever so slightly. So if we actually look at our posts, we shouldn't see any of the drafts or the future items. So ones that aren't in the past, right? So the only things that should show up are things that are in the past or that are not drafts. So this right here should not show up basically. Now, one way to do it very quickly and simply is just to add a filter onto this post objects. So I can just comment out this all and do dot filter, and then I can say publish double underscore is less than LTE, so less than or equal to some sort of date. In this case, I'm going to do timezone.now. Now, if you remember in the last one, we used timezone.now for a default value. And to import time zone to our project or to our models here, we just do django.utils import time zone, and that will allow us to use that module inside of this filter. So this is a good sign. All right, so let's see what that does. I'm going to filter that, and we'll refresh in here. And now that one in the future no longer shows up, but everything that's equal or less than today, or basically in the past, those things will definitely show up. But there's one more filter that I want to have, and I'm going to put it right up before this other one, and I'll say filter, and we'll say draft equals to false, right? So draft equals to false. So we don't want it to actually be a draft. So if I refresh, nothing seems to change. But this other new Tesla post, I'm going to come in here and edit and save it as a draft. And now let's go back into our posts. This now no longer shows up. Cool. That's another thing that we want to see as far as the list is concerned. Well, this is great, but what if I want to use it in other places? And I also need to make sure that our post detail, if it's a draft or it's in the future and they're not an admin or staff, they shouldn't be able to see the detail. They shouldn't be able to see this object at all. So that's another thing that we'll have to do. But first off, let's actually introduce a concept called model managers to actually handle this a little bit better for us. So I'm going to open up models. And above the upload location, I'm going to say class post manager, and it's going to take in models.manager. And the model manager is essentially a way to control how the models work. So a couple models that we use, or managers that we use already, we've seen it with post.objects.all. That's a type of model manager that works with the query set. It just brings back a query set. There's another one called post.objects.create. That is another type of manager that's actually creating the instance itself. So in create, we would say user equals to user, title equals to some title, and you would go forward with that for each kind of required field that you would need. So those are types of model managers. So what we can do is we can actually override these model managers themselves. So we can define all, and it's going to take in self as an argument. We can also do args and keyword args. And then we're going to return the super class of post manager and the instance of self. And then now what we're going to do is add this filter of draft equals to draft equals to false. And the publish is less than or equal to that timezone.now again. And since we did that, we have to import it. So from django.utils, import timezone. So now what this does is we actually are overriding the default all, right? So we can do this with all sorts of things, and this is a very easy way to do it. So by calling super of the post manager, this is getting the original all, the super class version of the all, so what it's inheriting from, so that's the model manager. This might be a little bit confusing, but basically it's taking the original one, and then this is now the original call, and then we're just appending filter and all this stuff to it. So think of it more of like this. If I copy this post.all, that is equal to calling that. Those are essentially the exact same thing, and it even might be equal to just calling, or it's exactly equal to calling that, but all we're doing is overriding that function by doing this itself. Okay, cool. So now that we've got this, let's actually go back into our view, and I'm going to get rid of this filter again and put it back to being all. So post.objects.all. I refresh in here, and now what we see is it's not actually coming through, right? So we created the model manager, but we actually didn't link in the model manager to our model. So down in our model, we come down here and we say objects equal to post manager, and we want to instantiate it, that is initialize it by using the parentheses. And we come back into our view, refresh, and now it goes away. So this objects, if we look in our model, we could call it something else if we want to. Objects is just the convention, and that's already built into Django. But if I called it, like, let's say, for instance, posts, if I called it posts, then I would go into views, and instead of dot objects at all, I would say dot posts dot all, and I refresh. It's the exact same thing. So you can change it on however you like, but objects is the convention, so that's exactly what I recommend that you stick with, is the convention, because then it gets a little confusing for any developer or even yourself down the line coming back and making changes to this. Cool, so now we've got that. That's model managers. There's definitely a lot more stuff you can do with managers, and we talk about this in depth in a lot of our other projects, what you can do with model managers. So if you want to know more about that, let us know in the comments, or check out one of the things on joincfe.com. So now what we need to do is test this on our details. So if we go back in, and I'm going to click on this post here, and I'm going to go into edit, and I'm going to change it to a draft, hit create post. So the problem here is now it's saying page not found, so no post matching query is given. And if we go to edit, it also is saying page not found. But we didn't do anything to the detail view, right? We didn't change this at all. And that get object or 404 is actually doing it for us. It's looking through the objects using this all method. Now this is great, except for the fact that we want to be able to see this data. So I'm going to, instead of calling it active, or instead of calling it all, I'm going to call it active now, and change our post list to being active. So then if I refresh in here, I now can see it even though it's a draft. So all I need to do as, so end users can't see it, is just add a few statements here. So let's open a new incognito window. And first of all, we don't want them to be able to see it if it's draft, but we also don't want to see it if it's in the future. So in the post detail here, we're going to say if instance.draft, then we're going to raise HTTP 404. So there we go. But if they're the staff, so let's actually put this in here. If they're the staff, then we'll raise it. If they're not the staff, then they'll raise it. So if we come in here, we should still be able to see it. So that's switching between the incognito window where we're not logged in and the regular window where we are logged in and we are staff. So that's showing us if it's a draft, which is great. And as far as the detail or the editing stuff, it's already going to raise that 404 if they're not staff or super users, so we don't have to really worry about that. It's more of the viewing part. So the next part of this would be or we'll say or instance dot the publish date is less than, or excuse me, greater than timezone.now and date. So basically greater than today's date. And if you just did timezone.now, let's actually do that. And let's get rid of the draft part. We're just going to call timezone.now. It's going to say it can't compare date time to date, and that this right here is actually a date time method. So we just need to use date here. We refresh, and now it's actually showing this. So if the publish date is less than that, so in this case it is less than that, or if it's instance.draft, then it's going to go through the verification process and actually change it. Where if we go into edit, again, it's going to change it. Now here, being logged in as the super user or staff, we can still do everything as we originally wanted to do. So the posts themselves, we could also change how this works for the staff user. So the query set list, we could just do if the request.user.is staff or request.user.is super user. Then we can just say query set list equals to post.objects.all. So now if I refresh in here, I will see everything, including the drafts. So since we have the drafts in here, we will say the drafts themselves on the list. And in fact, I will put right above it the title. I'm going to put another H3 here and says only if it's instance draft. So if instance draft, then we'll say draft, and we'll put the end if off here. We also could put a clause for if it's hidden, but I'm not going to go ahead and do that. You would have to do it through the view. Actually, you know what? We might as well just do it through the view as far as the query set is concerned. Just by simply doing today equals to timezone.now.date, passing this into the context variable. So today is today. And then back in our list, we'll also say inside of this h3 statement, we'll say if instance.publish is greater than today, then we'll say it's a future post. And we'll put an end if here. So I'm going to put this in the draft, keep that as an H3 inside, and then put the future post as H3 as well. So just a few headers, just so when we're looking at this list, we see that it's going to be so let's save this. And in our list, we should see that it's saying future post. Oh, this should be object, not instance. Little mistake there. So object.publish. There we go. We refresh, and now it says draft and future post. So that's just showing us that as far as the super user. We could say, you know, staff only here too. So staff only. And that just clarifies that it is for the staff. So the staff are the only ones that can see this. Again, if I see this and try and see it in an incognito window, I can't see it. It says page not found. Cool. So that's it for the publishing stuff and model managers. If you have any questions on this, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.